The traditional way of looking at things need to change. We have to innovate new solutions. Take, for example, the major issue of overpopulation. Is it a case, or rather, is it the case in over 1 million square kilometers that we are overpopulated? Or can we say that our major drawback is the poorly distributed population density? If the latter is the case, then we need to encourage youth to move out of the 6 to 7% area that we are all crammed in. But how? Through development projects outside of the valley, which we are currently witnessing. But where do we go, and where will we live, and how will we finance our new homes? I'm interested in the last question. How will we finance our new homes? An initiative like the one announced this week, providing mortgages for low and middle-class segments, respond to such a question. If I'm to finance my home over a 30-year period, I'll be encouraged to start a family, and I will have hope for a better tomorrow. Isn't this a basic human right? Good evening. I'm Ayman Salah, and you're watching The Business Insider. Our weekly program tackles events affecting economies and business, and we aim to bring you the inside story. Welcome back. Starting with the first news item for this week. Despite opposition from the World Health Organization, the European Union is set to unveil a vaccine passport scheme to allow free travel this summer and support the struggling tourism sector. The WHO has advised against requiring vaccine certification as a precondition for international travel, and there are disagreements between member states over the proposal. The WHO on Wednesday, the European Commission proposes a digital green certificate that would combine information on vaccination, COVID-19 tests, and recovery to allow people to take flights and cross borders within the bloc. It hopes approval will be granted by the European Parliament and member states in June, in time for the summer season. Countries that rely on summer tourism, such as Spain, Greece, and Portugal, welcome the proposal, but Belgium and Germany have warned against discriminating against those who refuse or cannot be vaccinated. Second and final news item for this week, the International Finance Corporation, known as the IFC, and a leading Egyptian private bank announced a partnership to help Egyptian farmers access financing to purchase solar irrigation systems. This will reduce reliance on diesel-powered generators and boost productivity and income. Both institutions will design new financial products to enable farmers, most of whom may lack direct access to the electricity grid, to purchase and install solar-powered irrigation pumps. The IFC estimates that using solar-powered pumps could save farmers up to $875 million annually in diesel fuel costs, helping reduce greenhouse gas emissions. An estimated 1 million diesel-powered pumps across Egypt could potentially be replaced by solar. The project is being implemented in partnership with the governments of Denmark, South Korea, and the Netherlands. We'll be back. Welcome back. You're watching The Business Insider. I'm Ayman Salah. Tonight, we're talking about giving a boost to the mortgage sector. How will this affect the economy as a whole? With us tonight is the distinguished banking expert and economist, Sahar Damati. A pleasure to have you with us on the show tonight.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
We'll start with a report, then we start our discussion.
Okay.
Economic reforms, including the flotation of the pound in late 2016, the reduction of fuel subsidies and the wave of inflation that followed, have broadly affected household purchasing power in recent years. According to a study by the Oxford Business Group, this has caused a fall in demand for real estate and impacted the sector's overall performance. Add to that the outbreak of COVID-19 in early 2020, leading to a further slowdown in demand. The most common means of developer financing, using off-plan sales for higher income buyers, were facing difficulties even prior to the pandemic. This model partially ties up the developers' liquidity unless they seek debt securitization or find other ways to relinquish the debts. In light of this, there has been a growing need for affordable mortgage finance mechanisms to support consumers' weakened purchasing power. In an effect to support interest rates and increase the value of cash in the market, the Central Bank of Egypt, or CBE, has established a number of such initiatives, particularly directed towards low and middle-income household segments that account for the largest share of market demand. In 2014, the CBE launched the Social Housing and Mortgage Finance Fund, a $616.3 million initiative offering long-term financing for up to 20 years with an interest rate of 5 to 7% for low-income households and 8% for middle-income households. It extended the program to include an upper-middle category with an interest rate of 10.5%. In 2017, the CBE allocated an additional $616.3 million to fund, while a new $3.1 billion fund was launched in 2019 to supply middle-income households with loans at an interest rate of 10% and repayment terms of up to 20 years. This week, the CBE announced that low and middle-income earners will have access to a further $6.4 billion worth of subsidized mortgages at a subsidized rate of 3% with 30-year repayment period. These initiatives have helped boost the mortgage sector, which still has a low penetration rate at 3% of the population, with a total value comprising 0.36% of GDP as of 2019, while the majority of the purchases are still made using cash rather than credit. In comparison, the global average stands at around 60 to 80% of GDP. Although the outbreak of COVID-19 is likely to result in slower growth across the real estate sector in near term, as the population continues to rise, mortgage financing initiatives are expected to stimulate demand in the medium to long term. Expanding mortgage financing will also contribute to improving living standards and developing the money market.
Welcome back. You're watching the Business Insider. I'm Ayman Salah. Tonight I'm joined by Sahar Damati, banking and economic expert. Once again, welcome to the show. We've been talking about initiatives since 2014 in the mortgage and real estate sectors or mortgage financing sector. What are the highlights of the latest initiatives and how does it differ from the previous ones?
Well, we'll start with the previous one. The previous one was also directed to low and medium income brackets. At that time, we were talking about a tenor of 20 years and actually an interest rate somewhere between 7 and 10. There has been a small amount allocated with 5%. Total amount for this initiative was approximately 20 billion Egyptian pounds. However, this initiative is much more aggressive because you're talking about an allocated amount of 100 billion, also directed to low and income brackets, and with a 3% interest rate. This is the first time that we see such an interest rate maybe in Egypt.
Over 30 years.
And over 30 years, it's the first time, although the 30 years is more or less a norm in foreign countries. So I think...
But it's a first for Egypt.
It's a first for Egypt, and the 20 years was the first for Egypt for that matter. But the 30 years is definitely a very, very, very good step towards working on such low income brackets and medium size to enable them to be able to purchase apartment at affordable prices, affordable interest rate, and with acceptable tenor. The initiatives, do you want me to give you an idea about the recent initiative?
Yes, please.
Okay. We're going to have like the low and the income brackets. There are a number of characteristics that the individuals who could be eligible for these initiatives to be have to be present to be able to access this kind of a fund. Number one, we're talking about an income brackets for the low income brackets of 4,500 a month if he's not married. If he's married, we're talking about 6,000 salary per month if he is married. While the middle class, we're talking here about 10,000 per month for the non-married individual and 14,000 for the married individual. In terms of the apartment price, maximum for the low income brackets is 350,000, and for the middle income, we're talking about $1 million. Though I can say that maybe these prices could change a little bit to higher levels, we will have still to wait and see. In addition to that, it's going to be there is going to be 30 to 35,000 grant allocated from the housing fund for support of real estate. So this would be also a very good initiative from the government to support the low income brackets.
What does that mean?
It's a grant.
It's a grant.
It's a grant.
So I get, if I'm applying for the mortgage as a low income individual and I meet all the characteristics, I'm applying for an apartment worth £350,000.
Yes.
So I get 35,000 out of
30
those.
to 35.
30 to 35 as a grant.
As a grant.
As a grant.
Okay.
And I have to pay, what's the percentage I have to pay of the 350,000?
You have to pay down payment, 15% over 3 years. So if we're talking 350, 15% would be approximately 52,000. Divided by 3 years, talking 17.5 per annum, which is quite affordable.
Right.
Of course, if you are going to put this grant, I don't know still how they are going to calculate it, but they will decrease it from the total price to 350. Then you will be talking up to about approximately 320,000, which will decrease further the down payment. And they have put as a number of, actually the installment will be 1,127 a month, which is quite acceptable. It's only 25% of his total income or a bit less, so that's not bad. He will be able to survive with the remaining 75. In addition to that, it has to be a fully complete apartment with all the infrastructure built in and registerable. It has to be, you have to be able to register this apartment.
So it has to be formal.
Of course, because you are going to get the funds from banks.
Right.
Banks need to ensure that they can get their money back. So in order to do that, they need to mortgage the apartment. To mortgage the apartment, they have to mortgage registered apartments only. So that's important. Another condition is that they are actually banning any kind of a disposal of this unit for 7 years. After 7 years, you can sell it.
You can't sell it before 7 years.
Yep. So that's the scheme. This scheme should cover approximately 200,000 units. So I think it's a very good start for 100,000 units, for 100 billion Egyptian pounds.
All right. What I understand is that we have over 500,000 marriages per year.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, I'm not sure about this number really.
That figure is quite an old figure. I would say it may be much more now. So if I have over 500,000 marriages per year, then I will need over 500,000 apartments.
Now, let me put it to you in a little bit a different way. According to the latest statistics, we need new units per annum with an amount of 500,000.
Right.
300 goes to middle and low income brackets, which is beyond the private sector developers, because this needs special schemes. And then you have 200,000. This is for what I call the A and B class. So if we are talking here about only low income brackets and middle, this is 300,000 is needed per year, which very much coincides with what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you're talking annually.
Yes.
Annually.
Annually.
Okay. So basically, with this initiative, we're targeting the low and middle income brackets. Why now?
Well, actually, it's not why now, because we started 2014 with an initiative for 20 billion. And it was very successful. It really penetrated a lot of the rural and some of the urban areas as well. But mainly the rural areas, so that was quite good. So, and it's, as a matter of fact, it's still continuing. It's still existing up to now.
It expanded.
It expanded a little bit in 2019 as well. It expanded twice, because it started with a 10 billion, then moved to a 20, to a 17, and now, right now, additional 3.5. So we are in the range of the 20 billion. So already we started with this initiative a while, in 2014. Right now, this move to 100 billion, so you are targeting the 200,000 we have been talking about, units, which is 200,000 individuals, by the way, more or less. If you add, for low-income brackets, if you add a little bit the middle class, then you're talking approximately 300,000. So I say, in terms of tenor of time, we started already. Is it important now? Yes, of course. Population is growing continuously, number one. Number two, there has been a lot of idle assets in terms of units sitting there in buildings everywhere, and nobody's buying them. Low purchasing capacity. It was time of the reform, the economic reform, which was quite crucial and actually affected the purchasing capacity to a certain extent. Three, you are moving to a huge development. Egypt has been living on 7 million fardans since 4,000 years. Around the Nile,
6% of the land.
which is 6-7% of the total land. When the president came, he announced in his strategy he needs to add another 4 million fardans to the 7, bringing them to 11. Started reclamation of 1.5 million. And this is to account for not only for the increasing population, which is really growing geometrically, it's too much, but also to lead development. Also, you have an asset that you need to use, rather than sitting as idle with no value. Now you have assets that bring value. You're moving towards the administrative capital. Administrative capital used desert, and now it's turning to a beautiful capital, which will be Egypt capital very soon. And hence you used idle resources to become profitable resources, earning resources. That, in addition to that, you're opening more than 14 cities, different areas, to account for all kinds of developments. You started with a strong infrastructure to be able to provide all of the cities with proper transportation, infrastructure needs, everything. So this drives this to what we call economic growth.
And also to formalizing a sector that needed to be formalized long time ago.
That's a different, this is part of it, in a sense. The informal sector, if we're talking 200,000 units, approximately, then we are talking here, let's say 150% of this would be to the informal sector. Approximately, I'm giving just an assumption. So it's one way among different ways that the government is using in the financial inclusion techniques and methods in order to bring in the informal sector into the formal sector.
Let's give an example. If I'm a plumber I work as a plumber. I'm not a salaried individual. I get paid per day. How will I prove that my income is, let's say, £10,000 a month?
This is an incentive for the plumber to become part of the formal, to benefit from the formal sector. If he has a tax card, if he has an approval to open a shop, a carpenter shop, for instance, or a plumber shop or whatever, then he has to pay to make some kind of registration. What proves me as an individual is my ID card that I am an Egyptian. What proves a company is the commercial register. So he must get some kind of card in order to prove that he is part of the formal sector. Some people are afraid from taxes, very normal. We find that everywhere in the world. But anyway, the new law that was passed a month ago regarding taxes for the SMEs, part of which are all those kind of individuals working in the informal sector, is incredible. Very low percentages that you would never imagine. But at the very same time, you're bringing in those people into the equation, into the frame, to part in with the formal sector. And that's exactly, it's this initiative, I see it as a bone in bringing in the informal sector.
How would this affect the economy?
Very, very positively. Why? On a number of sectors, on a number of segments. Number one, if you're bringing the informal into the formal, then these people are paying taxes, all right? Then you increase the tax revenue. By increasing the tax revenue, you use this money in educational projects, in health projects, in different initiatives that the government is doing in order to improve the slums, which need approximately $500 billion. Haya Karima, we're talking about significant development of infrastructure in 4,500 villages. Incredible. So you are free, you are getting resources into the government to enable it to do this. When they do that, they hire people. By hiring people, you produce goods and services, you decrease unemployment, and then this would lead to
It's a cycle.
a cycle. It's a multiplier cycle. This is one side of it. The other side is this, through this mortgage instrument, you are enabling the sellers of these apartments to get liquidity, to use the liquidity which was idle or locked in an idle asset in a productive business, in putting them in the bank to earn interest. And hence, this would lead to employment of these funds in productive service sectors and so on. And accordingly, through the multiplier effect, it would lead to growth. So accordingly, from both sides, and both sides I see as direct sides, this will lead to growth in GDP.
According to our distinguished and reputable former Prime Minister, Engineer Sharif Ismail, he said that the informal sector, the official account of the informal sector in terms of value is around 1.8 trillion Egyptian pounds. So that's the official count. Other estimates go over 3 trillion Egyptian pounds. Such initiatives, in your view, contribute to getting the informal sector into the formal one. Do you think such initiatives are in themselves capable of attracting the informal sector into the formal sector?
The real estate initiative which we are talking about right now, it's just one side. There has been other areas where the government has been working on to bring in the informal into the formal. Financial inclusion is a big part of it. Digital transformation, cashless society. So you're forcing the people not to use cash, and instead you go and use transfers, ATMs, and so on, and different means in order to be able to finalize your transactions. Credit, debit cards, and so on. So that's another mean. A third mean is providing the SMEs with a strong law and tax law that was passed recently, which is also encouraging them in order to come into the formal sector. So it is not only one item, it's rather a number of issues that the government has been working on, and I believe there has been some kind of success to do that, because before that it was never tackled before. People knew that there is an informal sector, but nobody was doing anything about it. Now, you're using all the means and all possible means, whether financial, non-financial, technical, non-technical, in order to bring them in. So I believe it's a matter of time.
Is it only economic factors when you look at them and you analyze them? You basically take figures and you analyze the figures. I'm interested in something else that might affect the economy in itself. You see, one of the issues that one used to talk about is the issue of hope, meaning. If I'm a young man starting my life, I'm worried about if I'm going to get a job, if I can afford getting married, buying a house, and so on and so forth. Such initiatives, by giving me an opportunity to buy a house over 30 years at 3% mortgage, the social effect in itself, does that affect the economy?
You mentioned two things, part of which is human part, which is the hope. Hey, you're opening a door for, that's a hope. So the door has been opened with this initiative. So there is hope. How does it affect, how does the hope now affect the economy? It encourages the young chaps to go seek employment, work harder, try to get the initiative, try to get the house. There is a hope that they can own one day a unit. And
they actually own it from day one.
Yes, yes, that's the point. So it's encouraging, stimulating into the individuals the reason to work hard, to be part of the economy, to contribute, enhance, to benefit.
And grow.
And grow.
Because when you start with such an asset, you want to grow.
By the way, let me tell you a small story that happened today. I was reading a little bit before coming to your program, and my driver said, "You're working on this new initiative of the government." I said, "Yes, I'm reading all the conditions." And he was so interested. And I meant to just give him a line or two and see whether he still was interested. But he was very interested. He wanted to know everything. Can I go and apply? I said, of course, you can do that. I've seen this, I have seen this in his face. So I'm sure that a lot of young people, a lot of people who are aiming to have a house for the family, not necessarily young, I mean, because this is not limited to a certain age as far as I have seen. I think it's a fantastic initiative.
But usually, in order to get a mortgage, you'd have to be below 60, which is the
yes, for
retirement
the age.
age.
But end of the day, yes, of course, because you need a source of income to be able to pay the installment. But again, the bank has an asset in his hand. So he's mortgaging the asset, which is convertible to cash. Of course, given the economic conditions but again, it's an asset.
The other thing when we're talking about financial inclusion is that you don't purchase cash. You'd have to go through a bank and pay through a bank. Therefore, you have to open an account. Is my understanding correct?
Oh yes, that's it. This is the main component, because you're going to sign with the bank. You're going to pay the installment in a bank. So you have to open an account in a bank.
Financial inclusion.
Yes,
right.
That's it.
Limiting the informal sector.
Yep.
Why is it that when we're talking about mortgage here in Egypt, the penetration rate, I mean, we have around 3% penetration rate, those who are taking mortgages, who are eligible to take mortgages, whilst abroad in developed countries, you're talking 60 to 80%.
Okay. Actually, let's look at Egypt's composition for me to be able to reply to the question. I mean, I would say around 50 to 60% are living in rural areas along the poverty lines. The rest are middle to upper class, which is more limited. Upper class, they don't have a problem, which is the A class. B class and C class are the major.
A class is probably what, 1% of the population?
I would say between 1 and 3%. This is off my head. It's not an accurate number. But again, within the upper class, you have a number of layers. So it depends.
Right.
But anyway, I mean, let's put them into A, B, C, D class. The B class and C class are mostly the classes that go and buy apartments, units, villas, whatever, twins from developers, and they pay through installments according to the scheme of the developer from whom they bought their units. So this is already working, but it is not really, it is a kind of mortgage finance outside the bank or a company. It is a scheme with the developer who's selling you the unit. Those, they get it through this way.
That's the off-plan sales.
Exactly. But then, the other classes, they don't resort to mortgage finance companies, except on a very limited basis. And maybe because the conditions were a bit tough, too much time in order to finance a mortgage, and this has to be really looked at. As you know, the registration in Egypt is not complete, so in order to be able to mortgage a unit, you must make sure that all documentation is correct. To make sure that all documentation is correct, it's a very difficult task.
And the ease of processing is also a key issue. Two things. One is maybe because I don't want to be under the microscope. If I apply for a mortgage and I'm in the informal sector, maybe I'm not interested in them knowing how much I make, or opening a bank account, or paying my taxes. That's an issue. So what do I do in order to encourage this sector to enter into the formal sector? That's the most important challenge in my personal point of view.
I'll tell you something. When it comes to the confidence, it's not in the mortgage. The mortgage difficulty, which I have seen personally across the years, is documentation requested in order to make sure this apartment is yours and could be registered. But you cannot register, so how can you take a mortgage? So you have to go through something called tripartite agreement, which is a very long process. So this is an issue that has to be resolved. And I believe that the government is working on this issue and on the registration. This is very important. Now, confidence. Where do I put my money? I put it in a bank where it is safe, where this money is not going to be used unprofessionally by other people because it's a matter of confidence. Confidence, go and put it in the banking sector. Like what happened with the Suez Canal certificate.
But that was because of a high interest rate, 20%.
It doesn't,
Now you're talking what, 9.25?
No,
10%?
still there is 11%. Well, you have to wait risk and return. If you are risk averse and you live with acceptable interest rate, 11 is not a bad interest rate. Plus, there
If
are,
the inflation is lower than 11,
which is 5.
currently.
So what you're doing is that you're giving the family sector, which is 70% of your 5 trillion deposits and certificates in the banking sector, you're giving them 5% above inflation rate, which is very good economically. However, if somebody there in a company that they know them and so on, tell them, listen, I'll give you 20% a month, 22% a month, they listen and they go, and they put their money in a very risky business. And it happened a lot that most of these companies went bankrupt. So but what happened in Suez Canal, that you had a project, all right, a very big project, where people were looking at investing rather than saving, which is the logic of investment rather than the logic of saving. In this situation, you've invested your money in a certificate that brings you, yes, 12.5, but at the very same time, it was financing a project, very well-known project. 27 billion came from outside the banking sector in 8 days. Imagine.
At the time, they were worth $9 billion US dollars.
Yeah.
And at the time, we were seeking $4 billion US dollars from the World Bank, and they wouldn't give us the money. But we in Egypt raised $9 billion in 8 days, as you mentioned.
Exactly. Imagine if you have left it for a month. How much, I mean, we got it from the outside the banking sector. The total amount that came was 64 billion. But from outside, which means Egypt has a lot of cash outside the banking sector.
How does this initiative affect the money market?
Very positively, because actually, let's look at it from a different angles. Number one, the money market is guaranteed. It's a short-term instrument. You put your money and you get interest or no interest, but it's guaranteed. Secondly, liquidity. Liquidity. So liquidity goes into the money market, into the short-term accounts, the current accounts, saving accounts, and so on. So it's a matter of liquidity. Liquidity is quite important because it's going to go into financing different projects. Accordingly, this will lead to decreasing unemployment, enabling companies in order to increase their capacity of production, in order to open other lines of production, open new companies for that matter. This decrease in unemployment puts money in the pockets of the people. They go and buy. There is a demand. This will boost by itself GDP growth.
So it's all, at the end of the day, it's a cycle that will affect GDP growth positively. Do you think that we need to focus on more awareness, more encouragement, more incentives for the people to join this initiative and others?
I believe that this initiative, although it was only broadcasted 2 days ago, but everybody is talking about it and waiting for the banks to open. So my hope is that this is only one side for bringing in a small part of the informal sector. But again, I think we should continue with it. We should increase it. Because as you mentioned in your report, actually penetration rate is around 60% in different countries in the world when it comes to the real estate mortgage financing, while in Egypt it's quite limited. And according to the mechanism, this leads to growth. And this is what we are making. And investment and growth.
And also leads to satisfying a basic human right,
Yeah.
which is a right to own a house, a right to a better living condition,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Sahar Damati, banking and economic expert, always a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you for joining
Thank
me.
you.
Thank you for joining us here on Nile TV International. Same time next week. I'm Ayman Salah. Good night.